I've been in this room for 8 years now, Clarice. I know they will never, ever let me out while I'm alive. What I want is a view. I want a window where I can see a tree, or even water. I want to be in a federal institution far away from Dr. Chilton.
What did you mean by fledgling killer? Are you saying that he's killed again?
I'm offering you a psychological profile in Buffalo Bill based on the case evidence. I'll help you catch him, Clarice.
You know who he is, don't you? Tell me who decapitated your patient, Doctor.
All good things to those who wait. I've waited, Clarice, but how long can you and old Jackie boy wait? Our little Billy must already be searching for that next special lady.
Good evening. The Silence of the Lambs, based on Thomas Harris's bestseller, stars Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, a psychiatrist with a penchant for eating his patients, and Jodie Foster as Agent Clarice Starling, an FBI trainee. The film follows her race against time to catch a serial killer who's known as Buffalo Bill because he skins his female victims. And as part of the investigation, she consults Dr. Lecter for his unique insight into the killer's mind. In a year which has seen films like Pretty Woman, Ghost, and Home Alone dominate the international box office, it came as a surprise when this ultra-dark psychological thriller became a huge hit. It's already made over $120 million in America and opens here this week. Critics have hailed Silence as a return to adult cinema, and it's the first hit for the critically acclaimed but until now uncommercial filmmaker Jonathan Demme, who's best known for quirky comedies like Melvin and Howard and Something Wild. However, the resulting film has not been universally acclaimed. While some critics argue that it's an intelligent feminist thriller, others contend that it's just a slick slasher movie. The Late Show talked exclusively to Demme, Jodie Foster, and their collaborators about the film, as well as to its critics.
I, at a certain point, started wondering, you know, what is my problem? I can do films that are appreciated in some quarters and so on, but there's some key ingredient that I'm simply missing. So it's great to know that finally you make a movie that gets seen by a lot of people.
There are only, 4 good scripts all year. You know which ones they are and you want to get them.
He understands the aesthetics of evil better than any other writer I've ever encountered.
We never thought this was a book about a man who skins women. A lot of people in Hollywood did, and a lot of studios were very squeamish about this book.
I finished the book and I thought, oh no. No, Jonathan. What about a nice romance in Paris? Why do this film?
The novel, The Silence of the Lambs, is unlikely material for a Hollywood adaptation. It's a dark story which contains macabre details about exactly what a killer does with his victims.
The human skin is heavy, 16 to 18% of body weight, and slippery. An entire hide is hard to handle and easy to drop when it's still wet. Time is important, too. Skin begins to shrink immediately after it has been harvested, most notably from young adults whose skin is tightest to begin with.
We have grown kind of jaundiced on all the old staples, vampires, monsters, aliens, whatever. And that at the moment, the one thing that is able to utterly, uncomplicatedly fill us with true terror, just at the very mention of the word, is serial killer. Because we all know that any of us could be a potential victim for whatever serial killer is out there looking for our type of person.
There's something about this philosophy, basically, because it's a way of thinking. Serial killing is a way of thinking, not necessarily anything else. A way of thinking where violence is the answer to everything, where violence is the way that they cope with the world and see the world. And that's a major problem in our society, that violence somehow is an answer and is given as an answer to so many things.
The whole American idea is if you have a problem with your family, kill them all. You know, if you have a problem with your wife, beat her up. I mean, if you have a problem with your neighbor, shoot him. Everybody has guns in this country. The thought of violence is the first inductive leap from conflict to homicide is a very short step in America. And I think we're fascinated by people who actually do this and who live this out.
We're interviewing all the serial killers now in custody for a psychobehavioral profile. Could be a real help in unsolved cases. Most of them have been happy to talk to us. You spook easily, Starling?
Not yet, sir.
See, the one we want most refuses to cooperate. I want you to go after him again today in the asylum.
And who's the subject?
The psychiatrist, Hannibal Lecter.
Hannibal the cannibal.
The story of this movie starts with Thomas Harris, a former journalist who's written 2 critically acclaimed bestsellers about serial killers.
He took 6 years between his first book and his second book, and 7 years between his second book and his third book. And you know, when you read it, every single thing on that page has been considered and reconsidered and considered again, from scenes down to sentences down to individual words.
Dr. Lecter is not crazy in any common way we think of being crazy. He did some hideous things because he enjoyed them, but he can function perfectly when he wants to. He's a monster, one of those pitiful things that are born in hospitals from time to time. They feed it and keep it warm, but they don't put it on the machines, and it dies. Lecter is the same way in his head, but he looks normal, and nobody could tell.
He has an extraordinary grasp of forensic pathology, which I find absolutely fascinating. So the solution of the crimes are very logical, very meticulous, and at the same time very obscure. He puts his investigations together brilliantly. And he has a truly imaginative and warped sense of evil.
Unusually for such a popular novelist, Harris hasn't spoken to the press for 15 years.
He is very articulate. He's extremely adroit verbally. This is a healthy human being. I've seen him in a party with 40 people, and he has a fine time. But he is not comfortable doing this thing. Even before Silence of the Lambs was finished, it was clear to me that he would prefer I not try to explore too deeply the writing process.
Tom prefers not to be involved in the movie versions of his work because he feels that that invades his imaginative territory for the next one, if he's going to use the same characters again. It's a self-protective thing that I understand.
Harris was not involved when his first novel about a serial killer, Red Dragon, was transformed by Miami Vice creator Michael Mann into the cold, stylish Manhunter in 1986. In it, FBI agent Will Graham consults psychiatrist turned psychopath Hannibal Lecter, played here by the British actor Brian Cox.
That's the same atrocious aftershave you wore in court 3 years ago.
Yeah, I keep getting it for Christmas.
Did you get my card?
I got it, thank you.
And how's Officer Stewart? The one who was first to see my basement.
Stewart's fine.
Emotional problems, I hear. Do you have any problems, Will?
No.
No, of course you don't.
The madness of Lecter is brilliant and is filled with wit, which is why I elected to make Lecter English instead of American as he was originally written in Red Dragon. And it's innuendo, And the threat is in cadence. It's in a micropause dumped in the middle between two syllables in a word. And if I really, that was the way suspense became pervaded throughout the whole of the picture, both in form, language, the rhythms in which people spoke.
This started from an abused kid, a battered infant. There's something terrible about...
Were you sympathizing with this guy?
Absolutely. My heart bleeds for him as a child. Someone took a kid and manufactured a monster. At the same time, as an adult, he's irredeemable. He butchers whole families to pursue trivial fantasies. As an adult, someone should blow the sick fuck out of his socks. Do you think that's a contradiction, Jack? Does this kind of understanding make you uncomfortable?
The intonation is the same and the cadence is the same as Lecter's. And we feel Graham, you know, is he putting this on? Is he intimidating Crawford? Is he in fact slipping into that same Lecter, Dollarhide kind of a world? That was the central fascinating aspect of all of Red Dragon for me.
When Harris wrote a second novel featuring Lecter, Michael Mann chose not to make another appointment with the psychiatrist.
I did not want to go back into that world again. I mean, I had it, you know, and it was fascinating. It still is fascinating, but it was heavy duty. It was a heavy duty film to make.
When a new book comes out, they send around synopsis to many directors and producers, or what have you, as they seek a buyer. And Ed Saxon told me that we had seen a little synopsis of this, and it was one of the ones where you don't just go, not interesting, you go, can you imagine making a film of such a thing?
Orion was developing the script with Gene Hackman for him to direct and star in. And Gene dropped out of the project, and we'd made we're in the process of making our third picture for them. And they called us and said, hey, we've got a book that we'd like you to read. And we read it. I was in California, Jonathan was here, and we both stayed up all night and read The Silence of the Lambs.
I agreed to direct the movie just on the strength of reading the book, which you're meant to never do. But I just thought the book was so fantastic.
The screenplay, when he first came on board, was more logical and explanatory. There were more scenes of Clarice and Crawford saying, what are we going to do now? Well, why don't we do this because so-and-so? And I was always afraid that if we lost those scenes, the audience would be terribly confused. And Jonathan always said, no, they're very smart. They're so much smarter than we ever give them credit for. And they will, even if they're mystified for 20 or 30 seconds, that's better than if they're bored for 1 second.
Look at him, Starling. Tell me what you see.
Oh, he's a white male. Serial killers tend to hunt within their own ethnic groups. He's not a drifter. He's got his own house somewhere, not an apartment.
Why?
What he does with them takes privacy. He's in his 30s or 40s. He's got real physical strength, combined with an older man's self-control. He's cautious, precise, and he's never impulsive. He'll never stop.
Why not?
He's got a real taste for it now, and he's getting better at his work.
We're all drawn to this character of Clarice Starling, to her kind of the human predicament she has of being faced with a lot of evil forces that are greater than she is. And that really centered the book for us, and we never really wanted to dwell on the darker aspects of the story.
The idea of doing any kind of violence, particular picture per se, didn't hold any particular appeal to me, especially violence with women as the subjects. But then you see that yes, that is the background, but it's very much this heroic struggle on the part of Clarice to try to save a life, and that gripped me right away.
He said, I think that this is a feminist piece. And I said, a feminist piece? You know, what are you talking about? He said, well, you know, this is a chance for a woman to show herself in a world that's really been exclusively inhabited by men for a very long time. And I said, yeah, but what about, you know, all this horrible stuff that this killer does to women.
We knew it was imperative that we honor the horrific nature of the book, because if you didn't, then it would be a watered-down version, and you have to accept the fact that one reason that people find the book so incredibly powerful is because it is so horrific.
Starling got through the photographs all right. Floaters are the worst kind of dead to deal with physically. There's an absolute pathos about them, too, as there often is about homicide victims out of doors. The indignities the victim suffers, the exposure to the elements and to casual eyes anger you if your job permits you anger. Here they had not even their skins as they lay on littered riverbanks amid the outboard oil bottles and sandwich bags. The cold weather ones largely retained their faces. Starling reminded herself that their teeth were not bared in pain, that turtles and fish in the course of feeding had created that expression. Bill peeled the torsos and mainly left the limbs alone.
Okay, 3 days. Then he shoots them, skins them, and dumps them. Each body in a different river. The water leaves us no trace evidence of any kind. That's Frederica Bimmel, the first one. Her body was the only one he took the trouble to weight down, so actually she was the third girl found. After her, he got lazy.
You had to know and you had to recognize that these bodies weren't just somebody we were talking about, that they were actually there, and that they were people, that they were daughters of, that they had graduation photos and dogs and all sorts of things, that they were real, substantial human beings. I wanted to make sure that that happened, and I obviously didn't want to make a slasher movie, and he wasn't interested in it either, so I never really worried about that.
It's possible to do a picture that is about violence and not make it about getting off on the violence. And that was a concern of ours all the way through making the picture, and that's why there are so many reflective surfaces where you see violence. That's why we took a lot of time, money, and care to do still photographs of the victims rather than trying to see Bill actually do physical harm.
It's a matter of keeping the story focused on Jodie's character and on what she's seeing and feeling. I'm not so interested in seeing it myself as in seeing her reaction to it.
As strongly as I feel about the Jodie Foster character and the feminist aspect, that's not what the press has been picking up. The press has been picking up Hannibal Lecter. I mean, it's Anthony Hopkins who has his face plastered all over magazine stands. So it's still being read in that sense like a great, I mean, this is the successor to Jason and Michael and Norman Bates and all those kind of scary characters.
Scary or not, Lecter has become an anti-hero of the 90s, whose killer charm has won over American audiences.
Good evening, gentlemen.
I didn't realize that Lecter was going to have the kind of incredible impact on people that he does. And although it's there on paper in Thomas Harris's book, a great, delicious character, and Ted really honored that character in his script.
Enabling Anthony Hopkins to seduce the audience from within the narrow confines of a tiny cell created a challenge for the film's designer.
In the book, he's got bars, and he's also got a net behind the bars. And the implication, of course, is that he is so bad that bars aren't enough, that if you get too close to the bars, he does terrible things to you.
On the page, that was great because it didn't intrude on the reader's ability to put them right up against each other, but visually it was just a terrible handicap. We were upset about the fact that we had extended dialogue scenes, and we were concerned about being able to see both eyes of both characters at all times.
Good morning.
Dr. Lecter, my name is Clarice Starling. May I speak with you?
You're one of Jack Crawford's, aren't you?
I am, yes.
May I see your credentials?
Certainly.
It would look like a prison movie, and it would evoke all these other scenes that we've all seen throughout the course of our movie-going lives, and it would deprive these encounters of the unique, special nature that they were entitled to by virtue of how intense the characters and the scenes were.
I just, at that point, remembered that in banks and certain liquor stores around town, they have these big plexiglass walls that they've put up to dissuade people from robbing them. And they're thick. They're like thick plexi.
You use Evian skin cream. And sometimes you wear lead on. But not today.
It also brought a bit of modernity into this medieval dungeon-like space. The inspiration for that actually came from a photograph of the Nuremberg war criminals where they were housed prior to trial. And it's a very, very powerful black and white photograph. And again, I don't know why, but something about that triggered something in me, and I said, this is the depths, this is the very lowest level inside this place.
Let me have the file and I'll tell you what I think.
Michael Mann imprisoned his lector in a very different cell, shooting these sequences on location in a postmodernist museum.
I chose white, and I chose hard verticals and hard horizontals, and the superimposition of the same bars imposing on Lecter's face as they are on Graham's. So we did this with tremendous precision. I made everybody crazy on the set, because when I cut from Graham to Lecter, I didn't want the bars to move.
You want to know how he's choosing them, don't you?
I thought you might have some ideas.
Why should I tell you?
You get to see the file in this case. And there's another reason.
Pray tell.
I thought you might be curious to see if you're smarter than the person I'm looking for.
Then by implication, you think you're smarter than me since you caught me.
No. I know that I'm not smarter than you.
Then how did you catch me?
You had disadvantages.
What disadvantages?
You're insane.
If I want someone as mad as Lecter, and I want him contained, then I want him contained in absolutely pristine, white, rational space.
You want the scent? Smell yourself.
I looked at Manhunter and I thought, oh dear, well, you know, that's a great way to go. Also, you know, this very super high-tech kind of white, you know, unbelievably antiseptic approach. But that didn't work for this, because this is a sort of dark, wet, sort of hideous, drippy kind of story.
Why do you think he removes their skins, Agent Starling? Throw me with your acumen.
It excites him. Most serial killers keep some sort of trophies from their victims.
I didn't.
No. No, you ate yours.
You send that through now.
Another inspiration for the look of both Lecter and his cell were a series of paintings by British artist Francis Bacon.
Oh, Agent Starling, you think you can dissect me with this blunt little tool?
There was something about Francis Bacon's work that I kept thinking about every time I thought about this character. I showed these to Jonathan, and he really said, wow, you know, I don't know how you translate this to the screen, but, you know, if this is going to inspire you, go right ahead.
What do you make of these?
Different configuration than the other victims.
But finding the right look for the crucial autopsy scene proved even more difficult.
When I started to work on the film, I was very nervous about doing it. I was very unhappy about the idea that I was delving into something so dark. And I also had this feeling that, you know, I know it's not true, but sometimes if you dabble in this kind of stuff, you can attract it somehow.
When it came to the more horrifying things that happened in the story, we didn't want to make people physically ill, and we didn't want to upset them in a way that transcends the kind of upsettedness we bargain for when we go to a frightening movie.
I wasn't so much concerned about how much you saw as how it was portrayed, because I think that in a movie that deals with violence and deals with why people find violence as a coping mechanism, to avoid the topic at all, in fact, I think is really to shy away from it and to not show it as gruesome, horrible, violent, ugly stuff, I think is a little bit irresponsible, actually.
In scenes like this, Demme makes the audience identify with Clarice's point of view.
Operating on the premise that every scene she's in is a scene of great importance, let's show exactly what she sees in every single scene.
She's got something in her throat.
This is probably the most use of POV that's in recent years anyway. And we wondered if audiences might find it distracting or what have you, but we decided to commit to it because we thought the potential was there to really up the emotional ante quite a bit. It's an easy shot to set up because all you have to do is watch what Jodie does in the rehearsal, and the cameraman's watching that, and now it's his turn to duplicate what she saw.
If I have like 20 things to concentrate on, if I have to hit this mark and do that and know this and move my eye here and match that, it's like a right side, left side brain thing. You know, my right side is so busy and I can't be bothered with the other side. You know? So it makes me feel less self-conscious, actually, when I have a lot of technical things to do to master.
Go ahead.
But the scene in which subjective camera is used most effectively is in Clarice's last encounter with Lecter, who's been transferred to a temporary prison. He's persuaded her to reveal painful childhood memories in exchange for his insight into the Buffalo Bill case.
We would usually start out with more conventional coverage and then go into the single, straight into the camera lens, you know, shot. It was not difficult working with it. I felt it was interesting because you're putting characters, you know, you're putting other characters directly in your main character's face.
You were telling me the truth back in Baltimore, sir. Please continue now.
Well, I've read the case files, have you? Everything you need to find him is right there in those pages.
And tell me how.
First, principles, Clarice. Simplicity. Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask, what is it in itself? What is its nature? What does he do, this man you seek?
He kills women.
As Lecter starts to talk and press his questions, we get closer and closer.
After your father's murder, you were orphaned. You were 10 years old. You went to live with cousins on a sheep and horse ranch in Montana. And
one morning, I just ran away.
The effect is that the bars actually disappear.
That you are.
And there's nothing between them.
At what time?
Early, still dark.
Then something woke you, didn't it? Was it a dream? What was it?
I heard a strange noise.
What was it?
It was screaming. Some kind of screaming, like a child's voice.
What did you do?
I went downstairs, outside. I crept up into the barn. I was so scared to look inside, but I had to.
What did you see, Clarice? What did you see?
Lambs.
Question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Except at some point, very important point when she's telling her story, I don't cut to him for some of the questions. The decision to do that is an important decision. By that point, she's so into her story and so involved in her story, it would really interrupt the flow of the scene.
I opened the gate to their pen, but they wouldn't run. They just stood there, confused. They wouldn't run.
But you could, and you did, didn't you?
Yes. I took one lamb and I ran away as fast as I could.
Where were you going, Clarice?
I don't know. I didn't have any food, any water, and it was very cold. It was very cold. I thought if I could save just one, but he was so heavy.
Originally, we were going to have flashbacks. We were going to cut to the little girl leaving the house. We were going to cut to slaughtering lambs. We were going to hear screaming lambs throughout the whole scene, but it just didn't make any sense.
Thank you, Clarice.
Tell me his name, Doctor.
Dr. Chilton, I presume. I think you know each other.
Okay.
We found her.
Let's go.
It's your turn, Doctor.
Out.
Tell me his name.
Sorry, ma'am, I've got orders. Had to put you on a plane. Come on now.
Brave Clarice. You will let me know when those lambs stop screaming, won't you?
Tell me his name, Doctor.
Clarice! Your case filed. Goodbye, Clarice.
It's the only time they ever have any contact in the film. It's a very powerful moment. This moment, when it was shot originally, was just a grab and go. The finger touch was shot later than the scene.
To have taken a movie that's supposedly a thriller and to have 4 scenes that are 6 or 7 pages long of 2 people talking between bars where they don't move and the camera doesn't move is quite courageous. And if it had been done anywhere else, I think with Orion, if it had been done at Disney, for example, the first thing they would have done in that very first development meeting is they would have, all those scenes with those 2 people talking, take them out, And ultimately, I think that's probably what gives the film a certain kind of tension that it wouldn't have had and a certain kind of idiosyncratic quality. Otherwise, it would have blended into every other movie about police, police movie you could think of.
Unlike other thrillers, the filmmakers try to avoid exploiting the victim's fear and do not show Buffalo Bill, also known as Jamie Gumb, in action. As a result, he remains something of a shadowy, ambiguous character in the film.
To me, I suppose you could say that Gumb is something of a cipher in this movie. He interested me as an object of pursuit. I'm afraid not so much in himself. In fact, for a long time, I toyed with the idea of never even seeing Gumb until the Clarice character sees him.
When Out Week, the New York gay magazine, saw Jamie Gumb, they saw a viciously stereotyped homosexual psychopath and loudly attacked Jonathan Demme for alleged homophobia. We are not allowed to show you clips of this controversial character for plot reasons.
Jonathan Demme has made a lot of very hip films that people in New York really enjoy. People who are now very angry about this film, I'm sure feel let down. I think you always feel as a community much more let down and angry at people that you expect more from, and I wouldn't doubt that Demme is that sort of person.
I didn't realize that by Gumb possessing some traits commonly associated with stereotypical ideas about homosexuality, that he would then be labeled homosexual and a cliche homosexual and so on. He behaves campy in one scene, as in he tries to talk like a woman. He's not trying to be gay, he's not being gay. He's trying to make himself feel that he's a woman, not himself anymore, not he who he loathes anymore, but she who is a new person, unburdened by the history of self-loathing that he has experienced and carries with him.
I think gay people are being able to see that this man isn't really gay. But in the movie theater, they have actually heard people yell out, "Kill that faggot." And it's kind of weird, too, because what that does is, if some people in the movie didn't get it, now it tells everyone else in the theater that this is a faggot.
There are ignorant people that go to the cinema. There are ignorant people that will sit in the audience if they see a homosexual character being beaten up or killed on screen. They will cheer. What can you do? I mean, if you showed Mississippi Burning to a bunch of crackers down south, they would be applauding when the crosses were ignited. There's so many ways that we don't know how cultural artifacts and how books and how movies and how television affect people.
In the context of American culture, where homosexuality is viewed as a disease and as a mental illness. It's extremely easy to say, and this is an example of a mentally ill person who has certain affinities in terms of the way he's depicted to a gay man. You know, he dresses up. I never read him as a gay character in any sense, but that's where the controversy comes in.
From way back in the 50s with Psycho, right in through Dress to Kill and a myriad of movies through the 70s, we constantly see killers and serial killers who are gay men and many times transvestites. In reality, that is actually very rare, and in fact, I think there aren't many documented cases at all, and in reality, gay men, lesbians, and transvestites are the victims of serial killers.
Since feminists felt that this was their first film that they could feel strongly about in terms of a Hollywood film, feminists have been outraged by that attack.
It's about a female hero, somebody who is the savior of women in peril and who is taking what has been heretofore, you know, the traditional hero character and actually identifying it and pairing it to female form. I mean, it's not like it's a Rambo character, for example, and it's not like it's a sort of whimpering girl who's scared of the monster coming down the stairs. So what you have is a real female hero, and I really don't think that there's been one in a really long time.
The women of this story were a key part of the attraction, not only the Clarice character, but the girl who's been kidnapped and her mother. They're all strong. None of them are made to do anything bimbo-ish or stupid for the sake of the plot.
Okay, precious, time for a little treat. Precious! Are you up there, you little shit? Come and get it, pretty girl. Precious! Come on, Ray.
Certain critiques of the film maybe as being like a snuff movie or like yet another movie where women are killed that were actually coming mostly from men. So you have these feminists who are responding and saying, no, this movie we like. We would like to claim it as like, to some degree, a feminist film because of this character that we haven't seen before, a character who's like not, there's never a time where we really think Clarice is in like sexual danger. You just sort of worry about her being possibly killed, but it's not because of like this idea of a woman being hunted down. In fact, she's like trying to save another woman's life. That's a really unusual scenario.
Maybe for the first time in history that violence against women isn't about sexuality at all. It's about, I want their skin, and that's all there is to it. That it looks at violence in a way that I think is really, really real and graphic and is really about objectification. And people should know that violence and sexuality don't necessarily go hand in hand and that women shouldn't accept it that way and that shouldn't be the subliminal message. So I think that, you know, if you're going to deal with a subject that's controversial and dramatic, then you talk about it, you deal with it, you see it, and you resolve it in a very, very graphic and important way.
You're very frank, Clarice. I think it would be quite something to know you in private life.
Quid pro quo.